Thank you. Thank you for that gracious introduction, and thank you all for making it out on a not so pleasant evening, weather-wise at least. I was supposed to be here a couple of years ago, and I think I had a hip operation, and it knocked me out, and I always regretted that I missed it, and so I'm back here to sort of make up. I want to talk about a book I've just written, and so this is a thinly disguised propaganda campaign to get you to purchase this undoubtedly magisterial book called Revolutionary Summer. But I don't feel totally comfortable just hawking my own wares, and so that will be the last time we actually mention the book per se, except to say it's great beach reading. It's really short, and that all the royalties from this book will go directly to the Alexander Ellis Scholarship Fund. He's my youngest son, still in college. I'm trying to tell a very familiar story, a story that virtually every generation of historians has told before, and each generation has added a new interpretive gloss, which is sort of like another layer of wallpaper across the wall. And in some sense, one of my tasks was to try to strip away the wallpaper and get back to the wall itself. And so some of the things that I have to say that I think are fresh because they're not really new. They're just so old they've been forgotten. But given the fact that this is a story that's also the subject of one of the more performed plays in the American theatrical repertoire, the play 1776, I better have something new to say. I think I do, but that is very much up to you. I want to talk for 35 to 40 minutes. I don't want to read to you. I want to talk to you. Is that okay? I've got some notes. I've thought about what I want to say, but I don't want to bore you. If I was just going to read to you, I'd just pass it out, and we could then talk about it later. I began this project with a presumption and with a question. The presumption was this: that no event in American history which looks as inevitable in retrospect was as improbable and problematic at the time. And part of my task was to recover for the modern reader the sense of crisis and confusion and improvisation that was occurring in the late spring and summer of 1776. I had trouble because I date my letters, like in 1713 instead of 2013. So, again, it is not easy to write clearly and lucidly about confusion. But that was one of the things I wanted to be able to do and recover that mentality, if you will. And I think you'll see a little bit of what I'm talking about fairly shortly. The question I had, I called the Wilkes-Barre question, after Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Is there anybody here from Wilkes-Barre? No kidding. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There was nobody from Wilkes-Barre in San Francisco last week, I can tell you right now. The population of contemporary Wilkes-Barre is slightly larger than the population of Virginia was in 1776. Now, if we go out there to Wilkes-Barre now, do you think we can find George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Mason, John Marshall, and Patrick Henry? We ain't going to find them. Now, at some theoretical level, they are there. That is, human beings with the capacity for leadership are there, but the situation doesn't permit that group to rise to the surface. And so the question is, why did the situation exist in 1776? Now there is the Toynbeean answer to this, after Arnold Toynbee, which is that great leadership only emerges during times of great crisis. And this makes eminent sense, the pressure that the crisis creates. And yet, we can all think of examples where there's a great crisis and there's no leadership, like now. Or the coming of World War I in Europe. So what was special? You can't say there was something special in the water back there then. You can't say God looked down upon the American colonies and blessed them. I mean, supernatural explanations are not admitted. Even if you're an evangelical, you're not allowed to use those in a historical conversation. I don't know whether I have a good answer to this. Some of it's in the book in an implicit way. But I'll give you an anecdotal version of a partial answer to the question. It relates to George Washington. In May of 1775, George Washington puts on his military uniform and decides to go to the Second Continental Congress. He's the only one that's going to be wearing a military uniform. He's making a statement. He thinks the war has already begun. And it has, we know in retrospect. Lexington and Concord have happened in April. Bunker Hill is going to happen in June, which is actually one of the bloodiest battles in the war. But notice this. I know that chronology is the last refuge of the feeble-minded, but it is the only refuge for historians. Notice this. It's underreported, under-discussed in history texts. The war starts 15 months before independence is declared. It's going to shape things in this explanation that I'm going to offer you. Anyway, Washington's getting ready to leave Mount Vernon, and he says to his, what is that? Flood warning. Ah, okay, great. You know, here comes biblical here. Yeah, somebody gave me that line. Yes, thank you, sir. Washington said to his manager of Mount Vernon, Lund Washington, who was his second cousin, Lund, when the British come up the Potomac to burn Mount Vernon, get out my books and Martha, presumably not in that order. He presumed he was going to lose everything. When Jefferson eventually gets around to writing those famous words, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, they sounded pretty rhetorical. Hey, they were for real. It was everything. It was all in. You had to be willing to do that. And he was willing. Later, in 1779, a British frigate comes up the Potomac, and Lund Washington says, okay, I'm going to send out a skiff with fruit and presents to appease the British captain. So he does that, and the British captain says, hey man, I'm just fishing for herring. I have no evil intentions. He doesn't even know that this is Mount Vernon. So Lund Washington sends a report of this to George, sort of proud that, he defended the homestead. And Washington writes back and says, I am extremely distressed at what you have told me. You have sullied